She had always enjoyed her evening walks, even when the sky was dim and the streets were quiet. It was a small town, the kind where neighbors knew each other's routines, and the air always seemed to carry the faint smell of freshly baked bread or rain on warm asphalt. She liked the calm, the way the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the horizon in soft oranges and pinks. It was her little escape, a time to think, to breathe, and to leave the worries of the day behind. That evening the air was slightly chilly, with a gentle breeze brushing against her cheeks. She zipped up her jacket and walked past the familiar shops and houses, greeting a few people she knew with a nod or a smile. Everything seemed normal, until she noticed something shining faintly in the grass near the edge of the sidewalk. At first she thought it might be a piece of broken jewelry or a coin someone had dropped. Curious, she bent down and saw it more clearly. It was a tiny bracelet, delicate and fragile, just the right size for a baby's wrist. The metal was worn, but it still had a soft gleam, and there was a small name engraved on it. The letters were faint, almost faded with time, but she could make them out if she looked closely enough. She picked it up carefully, feeling an unexpected weight in her hands. It wasn't heavy, but it carried a sense of history, as if it had been waiting for someone to notice it. She examined it more closely, turning it over in her fingers. The bracelet had tiny designs etched into it, patterns that seemed familiar but strange at the same time. She didn't know why, but a strange feeling of urgency ran through her. It was as if the bracelet was more than just a piece of jewelry. It felt like it belonged to someone who needed it, someone whose life it might have been connected to in a way she couldn't yet understand. Her curiosity grew, but so did her concern. How had it ended up here, lying alone on the ground? She looked around, hoping to see someone rushing back, a parent or guardian perhaps, but the street was empty. The houses seemed quiet and no one was walking along the sidewalks. She felt a twinge of worry. Something about the bracelet suggested it wasn't just lost. It might have been abandoned. And if that was true, the thought made her chest tighten. She decided to take it home. Maybe she could figure out its story there, in the safety and warmth of her small apartment. As she walked, she turned it over again in her hands, wondering who it belonged to. The name etched on the bracelet lingered in her mind, a tiny clue that might lead to something bigger. She had always been someone who liked puzzles, who liked to follow threads and see where they led, and this seemed like the beginning of a puzzle she couldn't ignore. Back at her apartment, she set the bracelet on the kitchen table and sat down with a cup of tea, staring at it. She thought about the child it had belonged to, imagining tiny fingers that might have worn it, the soft, innocent weight of it on a wrist that had only just begun to explore the world. The thought made her heart ache in a strange, unfamiliar way. She didn't know the child, hadn't even met them, but somehow she felt a connection. She ran her fingers over the engraved name again, tracing the letters gently. It wasn't just the bracelet itself, but the story it hinted at. Someone had cared enough to have a name engraved, to make it personal, to leave a mark of love or memory, and yet it had ended up here, discarded or lost. She didn't know why, but the mystery called to her. She felt a mixture of fear, curiosity, and determination. She had to find out more. The next day she began asking around. She visited small shops, cafes, and even a local daycare, discreetly showing the bracelet to people she trusted. Some shook their heads, unsure, while others frowned as if the bracelet stirred a memory they couldn't place. One older woman paused for a long moment, her eyes softening, before saying she thought she had seen something similar years ago, but she wasn't sure. Each answer, each reaction, made the woman feel like she was getting closer, even if the threads were thin and tangled. She also started searching online, looking for any records or mentions that might match the name on the bracelet. It was slow work, often discouraging, but she didn't give up. She kept a small notebook, writing down every detail, every lead, and every person she spoke to. The bracelet rested beside her, a constant reminder of the small life it had once belonged to, and the story waiting to be uncovered. As the days passed, she began to notice strange coincidences. The name on the bracelet appeared in old newspaper clippings she found in the library archives. There were hints of a disappearance, a family torn apart, and whispers of something much larger behind the simple story of a lost child. Her curiosity deepened, but so did her caution. She didn't want to rush, didn't want to make assumptions. But the bracelet seemed to pulse with a quiet insistence, urging her forward. One evening, she visited a retired detective who had lived in the town for decades. She hoped he might recognize the bracelet or remember any stories connected to it. The man looked at it carefully, his eyes narrowing, lips pressing together as he examined the delicate piece. He didn't speak at first, just studied it as if weighing something invisible. Then slowly he leaned back in his chair and said he thought he had seen it before, many years ago, in a case that had been quietly closed. He didn't give details, only a warning. Some stories were dangerous to dig into. Some secrets had a way of protecting themselves. She listened carefully, feeling the weight of his words, but she didn't feel fear in the way he expected. She felt more resolved. There was a truth here, a story that someone wanted hidden, but she couldn't ignore it. The bracelet had found her, and she knew deep down that she couldn't just put it aside. It was not only a key, but a responsibility. That night, she held the bracelet in her hands, thinking about the baby it had once belonged to. She imagined the tiny fingers that had grasped it, the small hands that had kicked and waved with life and innocence. The thought filled her with determination. She didn't know where this path would lead, didn't know what secrets awaited her, but she knew she had to follow it. Over the next few days, she visited more places, spoke to more people, and pieced together fragments of stories. Each lead brought new questions, new mysteries, and new people who remembered bits of the past. Some spoke in hushed tones, others with regret or sorrow, and each encounter deepened her understanding that this was no ordinary missing child. Something bigger, something hidden was woven into the story. She began keeping a careful journal, sketching the bracelet, writing down every name, every clue, every emotion. She drew connections where she could, marked dead ends, and slowly began to form a map of the mystery. Every time she looked at the bracelet, she felt both awe and responsibility. It was small, fragile, and yet it carried weight far beyond its size. One evening, as she walked home through the quiet streets, she held the bracelet tightly in her hand, thinking about the journey ahead. The wind was cool against her face, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. She realized that this was only the beginning. The bracelet had opened a door, and once a door was open, there was no going back. For the first time in a long while, she felt the thrill of true discovery, the pull of something unknown but important. She didn't know where it would lead, didn't know the challenges or dangers she might face, but she felt ready. The bracelet had found her for a reason, and she would honor it, follow its trail, and uncover the story that had been waiting all these years. As she placed the bracelet carefully on her nightstand before going to sleep, she whispered a quiet promise to the unknown child it had belonged to. She would find the truth, she would uncover the story, and she would protect it. And deep down, she knew that this journey, sparked by a small piece of metal in the grass, was going to change her life forever. The bracelet rested in her hand that night as sleep finally claimed her, its tiny metal links gleaming softly in the moonlight through the window. Tomorrow she would begin again, following every lead, asking every question, listening to every story, and piecing together a puzzle that had waited far too long to be solved. She didn't yet know the full story, but the first threads were in her hands, and that was enough to start. The next morning, she woke early with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. The bracelet rested on her desk, catching the first rays of sunlight, and she felt a quiet pull toward it. She had spent the night thinking about the child, imagining who they might be and why the bracelet had been left behind. Something about it was different, unlike anything she had come across before. It was as if it held a secret waiting to be discovered, and she couldn't ignore it. She decided to start the day by visiting the small library downtown. It was the kind of library where the librarians remembered the townspeople, where the air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. She explained, without revealing too much, that she had found a baby bracelet and wanted to see if any old news articles mentioned a missing child matching the name. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a careful smile, nodded and guided her to the archives. Hours passed as she sifted through yellowed newspapers, microfilm, and dusty boxes of records. Each piece of paper seemed to whisper fragments of stories from years ago. Then finally she found something, a small, barely noticeable report about a child who had gone missing nearly a decade earlier. The details were sparse, but the name on the bracelet matched. Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a lost bracelet. It was a piece of a story that had never fully been told. The article mentioned that the child had disappeared under unusual circumstances. There was no mention of any kidnappers or suspects. The report hinted at family tension and strange visitors around the time of the disappearance, but nothing was confirmed. It was as if someone had tried to cover the event quietly. The more she read, the more she realized this was not a simple missing child case. There were layers to it, hidden threads she couldn't see yet, and she felt a growing determination to uncover them. Leaving the library, she walked slowly through the streets, letting the news settle in her mind. She noticed people going about their routines, unaware that a story that had been hidden for years was beginning to surface again. She wondered what the child's life had been like since then, where they had been and whether they had any memory of the bracelet or the family it had belonged to. Each thought made her pulse quicken. She felt connected to the child in a way that didn't make sense, like she had been chosen to find this story. Her next step was to speak to people who had been involved in the case. She started with the retired detective she had met the previous week. When she showed him the article and the bracelet together, his expression changed. He studied the bracelet with a careful eye, tracing the engravings and examining the patterns. "This isn't just a keepsake," he said quietly. "It's part of something bigger. Whoever had this wanted it to survive, even if the child was hidden. You have to be careful. There are people who don't want this story told." His warning made her pause, but it didn't scare her away. Instead, it strengthened her resolve. She realized that if the child was alive and the bracelet had survived, there was a reason. Some piece of their past was meant to be found, and she felt that it had been entrusted to her. She asked the detective everything she could think of, but he only shared fragments, little details that hinted at wealth, influence, and a network of people connected to the child's family. He refused to go further, saying that some things were too dangerous to speak aloud. Undeterred, she sought out other people who had been in the child's life. A former nanny who had taken care of the child years ago remembered the bracelet immediately. She described it with a soft, almost reverent tone, as if the bracelet had been more than a piece of jewelry to the child. The nanny recalled that the family had been protective, even secretive about certain parts of their life. She hinted at a powerful family network, suggesting that the child's disappearance had been intended to protect them, though she wouldn't elaborate further. Each conversation added layers to the mystery. She began keeping careful notes, recording names, dates, and small observations. Patterns started to emerge. The same symbols she had seen on the bracelet appeared in family photos, in old invitations, even in the corner of a diary she had found at the library. The pieces were scattered, but slowly they were forming a puzzle she felt certain she could solve. Days turned into a week, and she found herself following leads that took her beyond the town she had always known. She visited neighboring villages, talked to distant relatives, and explored old family estates that had been abandoned or left untouched for years. Everywhere she went, the bracelet seemed to guide her. People noticed it, some curious, some wary, and a few whispered warnings about digging into things that might be better left alone. At one estate, she found a hidden room behind a false wall. Inside were old letters, photographs, and a diary that seemed to have belonged to the child's parent. The diary was filled with careful observations, notes about powerful contacts, and hints at dangers that lurked behind the family's wealth. She realized that the child had been hidden for protection, but the bracelet had remained as a symbol, a key, and a reminder of the family's heritage. The more she uncovered, the more she sensed that the story went far beyond a missing child. There were financial documents suggesting influence over businesses, letters hinting at political connections, and subtle notes about rival families or dangerous acquaintances. The child's family had been involved in something that required secrecy, and the bracelet had survived as a small, almost invisible thread connecting the past to the present. Despite the growing danger, she couldn't stop. Every new discovery made her more determined. She felt a sense of responsibility, not just to the child, but to the truth itself. She couldn't let years of hidden stories disappear again. She continued to document everything meticulously, drawing charts, timelines, and maps to make sense of the tangled web. Late one evening, she met an old neighbor who had lived near the family's original home. The neighbor's eyes widened when she showed the bracelet. "Where did you find this?" he asked, almost in disbelief. She explained briefly, careful not to reveal too much. The man shook his head slowly. "You don't know what this can stir," he said. "That bracelet, it's more than a piece of metal. It's a symbol. People will notice if it surfaces." The warning didn't frighten her. She had come too far to turn back now. Instead, She asked the man what he knew, hoping he could provide context without putting himself in danger. He shared fragments, a story of family divisions, threats, and a sudden disappearance that had shaken the community at the time. He hinted at wealth and influence, suggesting that the child's life had been protected intentionally, hidden away from rivals and outsiders. She left the conversation feeling a mixture of excitement and caution. Every step brought her closer to the truth, but it also revealed how much power had been involved in keeping the child's story hidden. She realized that the bracelet was not just a clue. It was a signal that the family's history was far more complex than she had imagined. Back in her apartment that night, she spread out all the documents, photos, and notes she had collected. She traced the patterns on the bracelet and compared them with the letters and photographs. Slowly, a picture began to form. A child lost to the public eye, a family with secrets, and a network of people who had worked to keep the child safe. The bracelet was the first tangible connection, a thread linking her to a story that had been carefully hidden for years. She felt a strange mixture of awe and responsibility. She was no longer just an observer. She was part of the story now. Every lead she followed, every conversation she had, seemed to pull her deeper into a world she had never known existed. There were dangers, of course, but there was also the possibility of uncovering something remarkable. She knew she had to be careful, but she also knew she couldn't stop. The following days were a blur of interviews, visits, and late nights spent studying documents. She met a distant cousin who had once worked for the family, and he revealed that the child's disappearance had been necessary to protect them from rivals who would have used the child for personal gain. The bracelet had been left intentionally, a reminder of identity and a safeguard against total erasure from history. As she listened, she felt a shiver run through her. This wasn't just a story about a missing child. It was a story about survival, secrecy, and the quiet strength of those who had gone to great lengths to protect someone they loved. And she held the first piece of that story in her hand, the small bracelet that had sparked her journey. By the end of the week, she had connected enough pieces to see a larger pattern forming. There was a network of people, carefully placed, working to shield the child from the outside world. There were also hints of influence, wealth, and power that had remained hidden from public view. The bracelet was more than a keepsake. It was a symbol of a life that had been carefully protected, waiting for the right person to begin piecing it together again. She placed the bracelet on her desk that night, looking at it with new understanding. It was no longer just a lost item. It was a key, a guide, and a connection to something far larger than herself. She felt a sense of purpose, a quiet determination that whatever lay ahead, she would follow the path the bracelet had opened. As she drifted off to sleep, her mind replayed every conversation, every document, every fragment she had discovered. The story was far from complete, but she could sense the shape of it now. There was a hidden world waiting to be uncovered, secrets that had remained buried, and a child who had survived against odds she couldn't yet fully understand. The bracelet glinted softly in the moonlight, resting on the desk like a silent promise. It had led her this far, and she knew it would continue to guide her. She didn't know all the dangers or mysteries that awaited, but she was ready to follow step by step until the full story was revealed. She could feel the weight of the bracelet in her hand as she stepped out into the morning light. Each day had become a new journey, a step closer to a truth that was both mysterious and exciting. She had uncovered pieces of the past, traced faint threads that led to hidden corners of the town, and met people who spoke in fragments and warnings, but now it felt like she was moving beyond simple clues. The story she was following was becoming larger, more complex, and it demanded careful attention. Her first stop that morning was the old family estate that had been abandoned for years. The house loomed at the end of a long driveway, its windows dark, its garden overgrown with weeds. She had visited once before, finding hidden rooms and old letters, but today she felt drawn to explore the estate in a more deliberate way. There were hints that important documents had been stored here, pieces of the child's history that might finally explain why the family had gone to such lengths to hide them. She pushed open the creaking front door, her shoes stepping softly on the dust-covered floor. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the shutters, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny stars. Every corner of the house seemed to hum with memory. She moved cautiously, opening drawers and cupboards, lifting stacks of old papers and examining photographs that had long been forgotten. Each item was a fragment of a story she was beginning to see more clearly. In the study, she found a locked drawer. Her heart raced as she tried the key that she had found months ago hidden behind a picture frame. The lock clicked, and she pulled open the drawer to reveal folders filled with documents, contracts, and letters. As she carefully sifted through them, she began to understand that the child's family had been involved in matters of great influence. There were letters to political figures, contracts with major businesses, and notes that suggested the family had been protecting something extremely valuable, something that explained why the child had been hidden. She realized she had stepped into a hidden world, one that few people had ever seen. The bracelet was not just a token of the past. It was a key that connected her to the secrets of an entire network. The child had been protected for a reason, shielded from danger, and the bracelet had survived as a link to a life that had been deliberately kept out of public view. Her pulse quickened as she traced the symbols etched into the bracelet, realizing that they matched markings she saw in the letters and on the edges of some official documents. It was becoming clear that some people did not want the story to be uncovered. She could feel it in the careful way people responded when she asked questions, in the half-answers and warnings she received. There were hints of threats, of danger lurking behind polite smiles. She thought about the retired detective's warning, about the old neighbor who had told her the bracelet could stir things that were better left alone. And yet she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a deep sense of purpose. She had come too far to turn back now. Her investigation led her to a series of people who had been connected to the family, each offering fragments of insight. A former accountant shared vague memories of meetings and transactions, careful to avoid naming names but revealing the complexity of the family's influence. A gardener who had worked on the estate spoke of strange visitors who came and went at odd hours, people who seemed to operate under unspoken rules. Even the local shopkeepers seemed to remember the family differently than she expected, as though their presence had always carried weight and authority. She began to see patterns emerge. The bracelet, the documents, the stories, they all pointed to a hidden system of control, a carefully maintained network that had influenced the town and beyond. It was not malevolent in itself, but it was powerful and secretive, capable of shaping lives without public knowledge. And at the center of it all was the child, the one who had been protected, hidden away from those who might use them for personal gain. One evening, she followed a trail that led her to a small, unassuming building on the edge of town. It appeared ordinary from the outside, but she felt the same quiet tension she had experienced before when uncovering hidden truths. Inside, she found records and letters stored in a locked cabinet. The documents contained names, dates, and locations that revealed more about the family's reach. The child had not only been protected, but had also been positioned within a network that ensured their safety, while keeping them connected to their heritage. As she studied the papers, she noticed references to meetings and exchanges that hinted at alliances and rivalries. The family had been careful to avoid drawing attention, but even decades later, traces remained. She realized that uncovering the story fully would require patience, caution, and intelligence. Every step she took had to be deliberate, every conversation carefully considered. She could not simply ask questions aloud. Some things were only revealed to those who proved themselves trustworthy. The days passed quickly as she pieced together the network of people surrounding the child. She identified distant relatives who had acted as guardians, trusted advisors who had maintained the family's influence, and even old friends who had provided protection when needed. The bracelet, always in her hand or nearby, felt like a compass, guiding her toward those who were most important to the story. She sensed that it was more than coincidence, that this small item had a way of leading her to truth. Her journey also revealed the dangers of exposing secrets that powerful people wished to keep hidden. She received warnings, subtle and overt. A car she hadn't seen before appeared near her apartment at odd hours. Phone calls came with silence on the other end. Once, a stranger at the library asked her questions that seemed pointed and cautious, as if testing her knowledge. Each encounter reminded her that the story she was uncovering was not ordinary. It carried weight, influence, and risk. But even with the dangers, she pressed forward. She realized that the child's survival, their hidden life, and the protection that had been offered for years were all connected to a delicate balance. Disturbing it recklessly could have consequences, but she also felt a responsibility to understand, to document, and to uncover the full story. The bracelet was a reminder that some pieces of history could not remain hidden forever, and that small acts of curiosity and care could unravel even the most guarded secrets. One afternoon, she met an old friend of the child's parents. The person had remained distant for years, careful to avoid attention, but they recognized the bracelet immediately. Their eyes softened, and they began speaking in fragments, revealing a world of hidden influence, careful planning, and deliberate secrecy. They told her about the measures taken to protect the child, the people entrusted to watch over them, and the subtle power that had been maintained quietly. Each revelation added depth to the story she was uncovering. As the sun set that evening, she returned to her apartment, feeling the weight of all she had learned. The bracelet sat on her desk, gleaming softly in the warm light. She realized that her journey had taken her beyond curiosity. It had become a mission. She was uncovering not only a child's history, but the history of a family and a network that had been hidden from view. The significance of each piece she found was both thrilling and humbling. That night, she reflected on the layers of secrecy she had encountered. The child's life had been shaped by careful planning, hidden protection, and influence that extended beyond the town. Every step she had taken, every person she had spoken to, was part of a delicate web that she was beginning to understand. She felt connected to something far larger than herself, and she knew the bracelet had guided her here for a reason. In the following days, she continued to follow leads, each one revealing new aspects of the hidden world. She visited old offices, met people who had worked behind the scenes, and uncovered letters and diaries that provided insight into the family's decisions. Each discovery confirmed that the bracelet was more than an object. It was a symbol, a key, and a guide. She began to map the connections carefully, drawing diagrams and timelines to understand the relationships, alliances, and rivalries that had influenced the child's life. Her investigation also revealed hints of unresolved tensions. Some people had been protective, while others had been envious or opportunistic. There were rival families who had tried to gain control, business partners who had sought advantage, and distant acquaintances whose motives were unclear. The child had been shielded from all of this, but the traces remained, waiting for someone to piece them together. As she worked late into the night, she noticed patterns emerging in the symbols etched on the bracelet. They matched markings in letters, diary entries, and even the edges of photographs she had collected. It became clear that the bracelet was not only a personal item, but also a guide, a subtle way to connect the pieces of the past to the present. She felt a quiet awe as she realized that something so small had the power to uncover so much. The more she uncovered, the more she understood the importance of discretion. She could not rush or expose too much at once. The people she met were cautious, their trust fragile, and the network of influence was delicate. She learned to listen carefully, ask questions gently, and follow hints instead of forcing answers. Each small step revealed more about the hidden world surrounding the child and the careful measures taken to protect them. By the end of the week, she felt she was finally beginning to see the broader picture. The bracelet had led her into a world of hidden influence, careful protection, and unspoken power. She realized that the child's life had been safeguarded by deliberate choices, and that every piece she uncovered brought her closer to understanding the full story. She knew there was still much more to learn, but she felt ready to continue, guided by the small, fragile bracelet that had started it all. As she placed it carefully on her desk that night, she whispered a quiet promise to the child she had never met. She would continue following the path it had opened, unraveling the mysteries of the hidden world, and uncovering the truth that had been waiting for years. The bracelet glinted softly in the moonlight, a tiny, shining thread linking her to a story that was larger, deeper, and more remarkable than she had ever imagined. The days had grown longer, and with each one, the threads of the story became clearer. She had uncovered secrets, traced connections, and pieced together fragments of a past that had been carefully hidden. But now she felt as if she was approaching the heart of it, the moment when the truth would reveal itself fully, and the story behind the bracelet would finally make sense. It began with a letter, slipped under her door in the early hours of the morning. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting felt familiar in some way. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, careful not to let curiosity rush her. Inside was a note, brief but direct, telling her to meet someone who could answer her questions at a small cafe in the older part of town. There was no signature, but she felt a pull, as if the bracelet had guided her here. When she arrived at the cafe, the place was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered at tables. A person waved her over from a corner seat, their expression cautious but inviting. She sat down and they placed a folder in front of her. "Everything you've found so far. It's only a fraction," the person said quietly. "The truth is bigger than you realize. The bracelet, the child, the family, it all connects to something powerful, something hidden from the public eye. You need to be careful. But if you want to understand, you have to see it all." She opened the folder and began to read. Documents, letters, photographs, and notes were carefully organized. Each piece added depth to the story she had been piecing together. The child's family had not only been wealthy but had influence over businesses, politics, and social circles in ways that had remained invisible to the public. The disappearance of the child years ago had been intentional, a protective measure to keep them safe from rivals and threats that could have destroyed their life. Her mind raced as she absorbed the information. Every conversation she had had, every lead she had followed was part of a larger network she was only now beginning to comprehend. The bracelet had been more than a keepsake. It had been a symbol of lineage and protection, a tangible connection to a hidden world that few knew existed, and now she was standing at the threshold of understanding it fully. The person across from her continued to explain. They spoke of loyal guardians, advisors, and distant relatives who had ensured the child's safety. They spoke of rival families and hidden enemies who would have used the child for their own gain. Every decision had been deliberate, every move calculated, and the bracelet had survived as a link to the child's true identity. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her. This was no longer a simple story. It was a living history she had been entrusted to uncover. After hours of careful discussion, she left the cafe, her mind spinning with all she had learned. She walked through the quiet streets, thinking about the complexity of the world she had stepped into. It was a hidden world, one built on protection, secrecy, and subtle influence. The bracelet had guided her here, connecting the past to the present, and she knew it would continue to guide her toward the final pieces of the story. Over the next few days, she revisited the people who had been part of the child's life. A former nanny shared memories of the child's early years, speaking with tenderness and care. She described how the child had been raised with love, yet always shielded from certain truths. A distant cousin spoke in cautious tones, revealing the network of guardians who had quietly ensured the child's safety. Each conversation added layers to the story, filling in details that documents alone could not convey. She also began noticing patterns in the bracelet itself. The markings, once thought decorative, now appeared as symbols used in family documents and letters. They were subtle codes connecting locations, people, and events. The bracelet was a key, a guide, and she realized that understanding its patterns could reveal hidden connections and secrets that even the documents had not fully explained. Her investigation led her to a secluded location outside of town, an old warehouse converted into a small archive. Inside, she found records and photographs stored carefully by someone who had maintained the family's history over the years. The files revealed alliances, rivalries, and decisions that had shaped not only the child's life, but also the lives of those around them. She realized that the network of protection was vast, delicate, and maintained with incredible precision. As she examined the materials, she felt the magnitude of the story pressing on her. The child had been hidden for protection, yes, but also to preserve a legacy that had been under threat. The bracelet, small and seemingly insignificant, had survived countless years and challenges, acting as a silent witness to a history that was now in her hands. She could feel the connection between the past and present, the careful choices made to protect someone, and the delicate balance that had been maintained to ensure safety. Late one evening, she met the retired detective again, seeking guidance. He listened as she shared what she had uncovered, nodding slowly. "You're close now," he said. "You've followed the threads carefully. The story is almost complete, but be aware. Revealing everything can have consequences. Some people are still watching, still protecting secrets. Move wisely." His words reminded her of the dangers she had encountered, the warnings, the silent threats, the subtle pressure to abandon her search. But she felt more confident now. She had gained knowledge, understanding, and insight. The bracelet had led her to the heart of the story, and she was ready to navigate whatever remained. The following days were spent reconnecting pieces of the puzzle. She traced people who had been guardians, mapped the locations mentioned in letters, and cross-referenced names and photographs. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged of the child's life, the family's protective measures, and the hidden world they had inhabited. She realized that the bracelet had not only guided her physically, but had also symbolically connected her to the child's journey and the network that had preserved them. Then came the breakthrough. She found a letter, hidden in a book that contained instructions and explanations meant for someone trustworthy. It described the child's heritage, the decisions made to keep them safe, and the importance of the bracelet as a key to understanding their identity. The letter also warned of rivals and dangers that could arise if the story were revealed recklessly. She felt a chill run through her. The story was bigger than she had imagined, and the bracelet was the first tangible link that had allowed her to piece it together. With the letter in hand, she arranged a meeting with the person who had sent her to the cafe. Together, they began planning how to reunite the child with their history in a safe and careful way. It was delicate work, contacting guardians, verifying identities, and ensuring that the child would be protected while learning the truth. Every step required caution, respect, and patience. The stakes were high, but she felt prepared. The bracelet had led her this far, and she trusted it to guide her the rest of the way. The days that followed were filled with careful meetings, quiet journeys, and subtle connections. She met those who had been part of the hidden network, discussed strategies for protection, and slowly built a plan that would allow the child to reclaim their heritage safely. The bracelet, now more significant than ever, remained close, a reminder of the journey and the responsibility she carried. Finally, the moment came. She watched as the child, now grown, was reunited with key members of the family and guardians who had protected them. There were tears, quiet smiles, and words exchanged softly, carefully. The bracelet was returned, held in hands that understood its importance, and the child began to grasp the history that had been preserved for them. She felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that the journey had reached a turning point. As the family began reconnecting with the hidden network, she reflected on what had brought her here. The bracelet, a small and fragile piece of metal, had sparked a journey that uncovered secrets, restored connections, and revealed a world few knew existed. She realized that her own life had changed as well. She had grown more patient, careful, and aware of the power of seemingly small acts of curiosity and kindness. She spent the evening documenting everything she had learned, organizing files, and creating a record that would honor the child's story. Each detail mattered: the letters, the photographs, the names of guardians and allies. She wanted the story to be remembered accurately, respectfully, and safely. It was not only about uncovering the past, but also about preserving it for the future. The bracelet rested on the desk, gleaming softly under the lamp. She looked at it and remembered the day she had found it in the grass, how ordinary it had seemed at first, and yet it had guided her through months of discovery, danger, and revelation. It had connected her to people, histories, and a child who had been hidden but never forgotten. She realized that even the smallest object could carry immense significance, and that the power of curiosity and care could lead to extraordinary discoveries. As she prepared to leave the town, she walked slowly through the streets, taking in the quiet beauty of the surroundings. The air was fresh, the sky tinged with the soft glow of the evening sun, and the world seemed calm, unaware of the hidden stories that had been revealed. She smiled quietly, knowing that her efforts had made a difference, that a story long kept in secrecy was now safe and honored. She thought about the people she had met: the retired detective, the former nanny, the distant relatives, and the anonymous guides who had directed her. Each had played a role, trusting her to follow carefully, and she felt gratitude for their guidance. Together they had ensured that the child's story would survive, protected and respected, and she had been the thread that had connected it all. In the quiet of her hotel room that night, she held the bracelet one last time before handing it over to its rightful owner. She thought about the journey, every challenge, every discovery, and every moment of doubt. The story was complete in one sense, yet it would live on in the lives of those who had been part of it. She felt a sense of closure, peace, and accomplishment. The bracelet, once lost in the grass, had led her to uncover a hidden world, protect a life, and preserve a legacy. It had reminded her of the power of small actions, of courage, and of the importance of following one's instincts with care and respect. She knew that the journey had changed her, that she would carry the lessons, memories, and experiences with her forever. And as she finally set out to return home, the bracelet safely in the hands of the child, she looked back one last time, knowing that she had been part of something extraordinary. The story was no longer hidden. The child was safe, the family's legacy preserved, and she had followed the smallest of objects on a journey that would remain with her for the rest of her life. By the time she reached this stage of her journey, everything had changed. The bracelet, small and delicate, had guided her through months of discoveries, warnings, and revelations. She could no longer see herself as simply someone who had found a piece of jewelry. She was now deeply entwined with a story that had been hidden for years, a story that involved a child, a family, and a network of people who had shaped lives in secrecy. She had followed every lead, listened to countless whispers, and pieced together fragments of a past that had been deliberately protected. It was early morning when she received the message that would finally bring the puzzle closer to completion. The note was brief, sent anonymously, and it led her to a small, quiet town several hours away. There she was told she would find someone who had answers to questions she had been asking for months. Her heart pounded with anticipation, but she felt calm at the same time. Every step she had taken had led her here, and she trusted that the bracelet would continue to guide her. Arriving in the town, she found herself standing outside an old, modest house tucked between larger buildings. The place seemed ordinary, yet something about it felt significant. She knocked lightly, unsure of what to expect, and the door opened almost immediately. A figure stood there, cautious but welcoming, with eyes that held years of untold stories. The person invited her in, and she realized that she was about to meet someone who had been protecting the child all these years. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet and warm, filled with the soft scent of wood and old books. They sat across from each other at a small table, the bracelet lying between them. The person spoke slowly, carefully choosing their words. They explained that the child, now grown, had lived a life shielded from the world, guided and protected by a network of trusted individuals. The bracelet had always remained as a symbol, a small link to a heritage that had been carefully hidden but never forgotten. She listened, captivated, as pieces of the story fell into place. The child's family had been influential, but they had faced dangers and rivalries that threatened their safety. To protect the child, they had been hidden away, raised quietly, and only connected to the family's network when necessary. The bracelet had survived all these years, a tangible reminder of identity, legacy, and protection. She could almost feel the weight of those years in her hands, the history embedded in the tiny metal links. The person she spoke with shared how difficult it had been to maintain secrecy. There had been moments of fear, close calls, and decisions that weighed heavily on everyone involved. Yet through careful planning, loyalty, and unwavering dedication, the child had been kept safe. Now, with the bracelet in her possession and her investigation nearly complete, it was time to bring everything into light, but carefully. The story needed to be revealed in a way that honored the child's safety and the sacrifices of those who had protected them. She asked questions, gently probing for details without overstepping. Every answer revealed more about the hidden world she had entered, about the delicate balance of power and protection, and about the resilience of the people who had safeguarded the child. She realized that the story was not only about danger or secrecy, but also about love, trust, and responsibility. Every decision had been made with care, every risk calculated to ensure survival. As the conversation continued, she was finally allowed to meet the child's parent in person. It was a moment filled with quiet emotion. The parent had aged but carried a presence that spoke of strength, determination, and a life shaped by both loss and protection. They thanked her softly, explaining that the bracelet had been meant for someone trustworthy to find. It was not only a connection to the past, but also a step toward the future. The parent's eyes glistened with relief, as though the weight of years had lifted slightly now that the story was emerging. She could see now that the child, though hidden, had been kept close in thought and heart by those who loved them. The bracelet had been the first tangible link, a symbol of identity and heritage. It was more than metal and engraving. It was proof that the past had not been forgotten, that the child's life had been preserved with care, and that justice, in its quietest form, had been maintained. She felt a sense of awe and responsibility settle over her. In the following days, she worked with the family to ensure that the truth would be shared carefully. They began reconnecting with those who had been part of the hidden network, re-establishing connections and reclaiming pieces of a life that had been protected from public view. There were difficult conversations, moments of hesitation, and memories that surfaced slowly. Yet through it all, the bracelet remained a steady guide, a reminder of where the journey had started and what it had achieved. The child, now grown, met her for the first time. There was an instant recognition, a quiet understanding of the journey that had brought them together. The bracelet was returned to its rightful owner, who held it with a mixture of wonder, gratitude, and reflection. It was a moment of closure, yet also a new beginning. The child's heritage, identity, and legacy were no longer hidden. They could move forward, shaped by a past they had been shielded from but never erased. She watched as the family slowly reclaimed parts of their life that had been inaccessible for so long. Business connections, old friends, and trusted allies began to reconnect, cautiously at first but with growing trust. She realized that the bracelet had not only guided her, but had also served as a bridge between past and present. Its journey from the grass where she had found it to this moment had carried more than history. It had carried hope, protection, and the possibility of a life once threatened by secrecy. The experience had changed her too. She had entered this story as someone curious and caring, but she emerged with a deeper understanding of human resilience, loyalty, and the weight of decisions made to protect those we love. She thought about all the people she had met along the way, the retired detective, the old neighbor, the former nanny, the distant relatives, and felt gratitude for their honesty and trust. They had shared pieces of their lives, fragments of truth, and guided her with caution and care. In the days that followed, she helped document the story, ensuring that it would be remembered accurately and respectfully. Every document, letter, and photograph was cataloged and every memory preserved. It was a way to honor the child's past and safeguard the integrity of the story for the future. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the bracelet, once lost in the grass, had brought her to this point and had helped uncover a truth that might have remained hidden forever. She also realized that the journey had taught her something profound about the power of small actions. Picking up a tiny bracelet from the street had led to uncovering secrets, restoring connections, and protecting a life that had been carefully hidden. It reminded her that even small acts of care, curiosity, and persistence could have far-reaching consequences, sometimes changing the course of many lives. The final days of the journey were spent reflecting, reconnecting, and observing the family as they began to adjust to a world that had remained distant for so long. The child, now aware of their heritage and influence, handled the transition with quiet strength. The bracelet, finally in their hands, was a symbol not only of survival, but also of identity, continuity, and the careful preservation of history. It had survived years of uncertainty, guided her steps, and ultimately reunited them with their story. On her last night in the town, she sat quietly in a small room overlooking the street. The bracelet lay on the table in front of her, gleaming softly under the light. She thought about the journey, every step she had taken, and every person who had helped her along the way. The story was complete in one sense, yet it would continue to live in the lives of those who had been part of it. She felt a sense of peace and accomplishment, knowing she had played a role in protecting, uncovering, and sharing a story that mattered. Before leaving, she walked through the town one last time, breathing in the familiar smells of rain and wood smoke. People passed by, unaware of the hidden truths that had been revealed, the lives that had been changed, and the legacy that had been preserved. She smiled quietly, feeling the satisfaction of knowing that her actions, guided by curiosity and compassion, had made a real difference. As she returned home, she carried with her the lessons of the journey, the importance of care, patience, and perseverance, the value of small gestures, and the way that courage, even in quiet moments, could uncover truths that had been hidden for years. The bracelet, once lost and fragile, had been the key to a story that was remarkable, delicate, and human in every sense. It had led her to a world she could never have imagined, and she knew she would carry the memory of it forever. The story had reached its end, yet its impact would continue. The child, the family, and everyone involved had been given a chance to reclaim what was theirs, guided by loyalty, love, and protection. And she had learned that even the smallest spark, an object found on a quiet street, could ignite a journey that changed lives. The bracelet rested in the child's hands now, but its story would remain with her always, a reminder of the power of connection, courage, and compassion. She smiled softly, thinking about the day she had found it, how ordinary that moment had seemed, how unremarkable the bracelet had appeared in the grass, yet it had set in motion a story of resilience, secrecy, and rediscovery. It had reminded her that even in the quietest corners of the world, hidden stories waited for someone willing to notice, to care, and to act. The bracelet had led her through a journey she would never forget, and the story it carried would live on in ways she could only imagine.